Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm BATRISYIA NAJIHAH with my matrix number 288692. I'm from Group 9. Our group has chose the topic of overtime payment, and we chose Toyota Assembly Sedan Berhad to conduct this assignment. I will start my presentation by explaining about overtime pay. Overtime pay is one of the examples of compensation that is given to the employees as a reward to appreciate their hard work. Overtime is defined as any hours spent by an employee that exceed their regularly planned working hours. The general rule is that overtime begins with an employee who works more than 8 hours per day or more than 40 hours per week. In Malaysia, overtime payment rate is based on Employment Act 1955. It has been implemented on May 2022. According to Tan Sri Lau Klan Chuan, the weekly working hours are decreased from 48 hours to 45 hours. Under the new changes, employees entitled to overtime pay will be those earning up to 4,000 ringgit Malaysia as compared to under the old law, where only those earning up to 2,000 ringgit Malaysia were entitled to receive overtime pay. Under the prior legislation, employees who work more than 48 hours per week were entitled to overtime compensation. However, under the new law, they will be eligible to overtime pay if they work more than 45 hours per week.
Assalamualaikum everyone. My name is NURHANISAH binti SHAMSUL and my matric number is 28551A. So today, I would like to continue the presentation about the types of overtime payment. There are 3 sections that I will discuss, which are overtime payment as stipulated in Employment Act 1995, Toyota overtime payment, and my group opinion regarding overtime payment. Based on Employment Act 1955, there are 6 types of overtime payment, which is OT, in Malaysia. Firstly, works longer than average working hours on a typical workday, which is 1.5 times hourly wage according to the Section 60A 3A. Next, work during a rest day, but not for more than half the typical working hours, calculated as 0.5 times the regular rate of pay based on Section 63B 1 Roman. Besides, work on a rest day, but the work period is more significant than half, but does not exceed the standard working hours, and the formula is 1 day's pay at the regular rate as stated in Section 63B 2 Roman. Additionally, any job done on a rest day that exceeds the typical working hour calculated as 2 times hourly wage according to the Section 63C. Other than that, works on a public holiday but does not exceed typical working hours. The overtime rate is 2 days salary and the usual rate of pay as claimed in Section 60D 3A 1 Roman. Lastly, any work performed on a public holiday that exceeds the typical working hours, which calculated as 3 times hourly wage based on Section 60D 3AA. Next, based on our interview with Mr. Tajun, Executive Engineer of Toyota, he mentioned that Toyota consists of 4 types of overtime, which are overtime after working hours, overtime on weekends, overtime on public holidays, and overtime during production run. Overtime working hours means that any job done beyond the normal working hours of 8 hours each day. Also, Toyota's agreement permits employees to work up to 45 hours of overtime per month and 360 hours annually, but also permits additional overtime at exceptional busy times. Whilst overtime on weekends at Toyota for Saturday and Sunday has a different OT rate in which employees will be paid work rate per day 1.5 times and work rate per day 2 times, which is double respectively. For overtime on public holidays, the employees will be paid 3 times, which is triple. Lastly, for overtime during production run, this overtime occurred only on public holidays, but overnight policy rate, which is OPR, still requires the production of cars. Regarding Mr. Tajun, the employees will be paid 3 times, which is triple, but the payment of OT will only be paid 70% from the total overtime payment of the production run. Lastly, in our opinion, based on the types of overtime stated above, overtime on regular working days has been calculated based on the Employment Act 1995, which is the work rate per day 1.5 times. The employees at Toyota are considered overtime when they work more than 8 hours for normal working days. The working hours also are aligned with Employment Act 1995. Apart from that, for the overtime on a rest day, which is on Sunday, Toyota implemented the overtime payment according to Section 63C, the work rate per day 2 times double. Apart from that, based on our perspective, the rates for overtime on public holidays at Toyota are the same as Employment Act 1995, Section 60D 3AA, in which the employees will be paid 3 times, which is triple. Besides, the additional types of OT in Toyota are production run, and the company OT payment is aligned with the Employment Act 1995. Even the employees will receive 70% of the total overtime payment. That's all from me. Thank you. I will pass to the next presenter.
Good morning everyone, my name is YINOSHA from JAKANATHAN, matrix number 281146, and I will be explaining about the overtime payment procedure. In the employment world, there are instances when employees are required to work additional hours beyond their regular schedule. This often occurs during significant projects of heightened demand for a company's products or services. It is crucial for employees to adhere to the Employment Act of 1995 and provide proper compensation for overtime work. To ensure compliance and avoid any potential breaches of the regulation, it is essential for companies to establish a well-defined procedure for handling overtime payments. By following a 5-step process, companies can effectively manage and compensate their employees for the extra time they dedicate to their work. Next is the determination of employer eligibility for overtime payment. Companies need to determine if the employees are exempt or non-exempt to determine eligibility for overtime pay under the FLSA. Exempt staff are not eligible for overtime pay if they earn at least 23,600 per month, and non-exempt staff earning less than 23,600 per year are eligible for overtime pay. However, some companies may choose to provide overtime compensation to exempt staff without affecting their exempt status. Certain companies may choose to provide overtime compensation to their exempt staff without compromising their exempt status and at the company's discretion. However, this pertains to the determination of employer eligibility for overtime payment under the FLSA, which applies only within the United States. In Malaysia, employer eligibility for overtime payment is governed by the provisions of Employment Act 1995. An amendment to the Employment Act 1995 ensures that all employers, regardless of their salary level, are protected by the Act. However, employees with wages exceeding 4,000 are generally not eligible for overtime pay, except for specific categories such as those engaged in manual labor and operating vehicles for transportation. Companies may still choose to provide overtime pay to employees earning above 4,000 by incorporating it into their employment contracts at the employer's discretion. Determining employee eligibility for overtime pay necessitates a comprehensive understanding of the labour laws and regulations specific to the country, such as Employment Act 1995 in Malaysia, along with any relevant modification or expectations. Businesses are advised to consult resources provided by their respective labour departments to ensure compliance and fair treatments of workers when accessing eligibility of overtime pay.
Assalamualaikum everyone, my name is Aiman Afiqah and my metric number is 287095. Now I'm going to present the second step of OT payment procedure, which is the OT duration agreement. According to the Employment Limitation of Overtime Work Regulation of 1980, the maximum number of hours of OT that can be worked is 104 hours per month, 24 hours per week and 4 hours per day. In order to avoid any OT abuse, the duration of OT work should be discussed and agreed upon by both employers and employees. It should be communicated clearly in employment contract to avoid any misunderstanding or dispute in the future. In Toyota, the hours of OT that can be worked is 45 hours per month, 360 hours annually, and approximately 2 hours per day. However, Toyota still permits employee to work more than 2 hours at busy time. While the agreement of OT duration is implemented by employees' request to work overtime from the employer, the employee should fill out a digital form template to list the task or activity they want to execute during overtime hours. Once the employer has approved the request form, only then employees can work overtime. Based on our research, our group thinks that allotment of 2 hours of OT is advantageous for both the employee and the employer. The employer can control the company compensation expenses, whereas the employees can be more efficient in completing tasks. Additionally, the implemented agreement practice in Toyota will help employers determine whether it's vital for them to work overtime or not. Hence, the wage theft issue can be prevented and the OT payment will be equivalent to the performed overtime work. Moving on to the next step is tracking OT hours accurately. Tracking OT hours accurately is important to avoid any issues among employees that might feel discriminated against wage theft. It is also important to employers to ensure they are compliant with labour laws, help them in monitoring the company's ongoing expenses, and avoid any employees' time theft. In order to track OT hours accurately, every company should add an advanced feature to their attendance system, such as biometric system, automated system, artificial intelligence, and time attendance software. Thus, they can minimize error in attendance record and easier for the payroll executive to execute the overtime calculation in the payroll system. Other than that, requiring employees to verify work hours also can help companies obtain precise OT hours. Toyota used an RFID card time clock attendance, in which the data about the attendance and work hours are automatically recorded to a server that can access from the desktop. Once employees tap their card, the time clock attendance will capture the employee's face. In addition, some of the employees also record their own work hours manually in Excel timesheet. Our group thinks that the method Toyota uses is effective because the attendance system that captures an employee face is able to avoid body punching. This also reflects in assisting the company practicing good attitudes among employees and improving their discipline. Also, by using the system, the company can avoid intruders who could harm the company and its employees. Additionally, we think that Toyota implement a less advanced attendance system because they are a manufacturing company, in which they don't need advanced technology like time tracking apps because manufacturing employees do not regularly access the desktop or smartphones. That's all from me. I'm going to pass this presentation to the next presenter.
After we are done with the three initial steps, we will next calculate the overtime work hours using the payroll system. The calculation must include the rate of overtime, working hours, and employee salary or wage. It is important and compulsory for the organization to comply with the Employment Act 1955, where it has fixed the minimum rate for overtime payment. The Employment Act should be the guidance for a company to determine their overtime rate, where the minimum rate for the overtime on ordinary working day is 1.5 times and 2 times on the rest day of the employee, while 3 times on the public holiday. It is a must for the employers to align with the EA 1955 because if not, they will be subject to action under the provision of the law. The calculation of the overtime should consider the type of employment, whether it is a daily or a monthly basis, in order to calculate the ordinary rate of pay, or we call it as ORP. If it is daily basis, the daily wage should be divided by working hours, and if it is monthly basis, the monthly salary will be divided by the working days.
Next, we will be computing the hourly rate pay or HRP to get the total daily earnings of the employees. It is computed by timing the ORP and the working hours of the employee. Then we will be determining which rate we will be using to calculate the overtime payment, whether it is 1.5, 2 or 3 times depending on the day that the employees are performing their overtime. The full formula to calculate the overtime is ORP plus HRP times with the overtime rate and times with the overtime working hours. By completing this calculation, we will be getting the total payment of overtime that the employee will get. So let's talk about Toyota overtime calculation. From the report that our group had done, we found that Toyota comply with the EA 1955 where they set the overtime pay rate according to the EA 1955 like mentioned before. However, we noticed that Toyota has a production run overtime which is held during the public holiday. This means that they have 4 types of overtime which are normal working days, rest day, public holiday and also production run day. The time of rate on the production run day is the same as the public holiday, but what makes it different is the total payment of the production run and the public holiday will not be the same because on the production run day, Toyota only counted 70% of the total overtime pay as the employee overtime.
After the management has computed the overtime calculation, the most exciting step for employees has come, which is the payment of salary including the overtime compensation. Malaysian labour law has regulated the compensation payment period that the employee is obligated to follow. Employers are allowed to pay employees' wages within 7 days after the last day of the wage period. EA 1995 also obligated the employee to pay overtime compensation on a working day. In Toyota, the employee will pay both the monthly salary and overtime compensation. However, for the payment of the monthly overtime compensation, it will be paid for the next month's salary, and majority of employees has accepted the payment period that has been given by Toyota. In our opinion, EA 1955 was set up to ensure that all employees are given fair treatment. It is important for the companies to obey the law in place to protect the employees. In addition, if the employees in the organization agree with the period of salary and overtime payment, then it will not be a problem if there's delay in the overtime payment. It would not be an issue if Toyota pays the overtime payment on the next month as long as the salary is paid on time.
This is the illustration of how to count overtime payment. So we can see here we have 1.5 times, 2.0 times and 3.0 times. So this is the illustration where to count an overtime for 1.5 times, we should have the MRP which is monthly rate pay, and then we will plus with the HRP times it 1.5 which is the rate of the overtime and times with the working hours. So we will get this kind of calculation. Based on our discussion with Mr. Tajul from Toyota Bukit Raja plant, we discovered that Toyota is using calculation of overtime that align with the Employment Act 1955. However, we found that Toyota is using work rate per day as the base to determine the overtime pay rather than hourly rate of pay. For the production run day, Toyota also have its own way of calculating the employee's overtime pay. Production run day will only be held on the public holiday, so it uses the same pay rate as public holiday, which is 3 times, but Toyota only takes 70% of the total overtime pay. This is Toyota's policy that is written in their contract of employment.
The discussion highlights the importance of fair employee compensation and the practices implemented by companies like Toyota Assembly Sdn Bhd regarding overtime pay. Overtime criteria vary across countries, with the US Department of Labour mandating overtime compensation for eligible employees working beyond 40 hours per week. In Malaysia, recent amendments to the Employment Act of 1995 have expanded overtime pay eligibility. Toyota Assembly Sdn Bhd follows specific procedures for overtime payment, allowing a maximum of 45 hours per month and 2 days per day, with flexibility during busy periods. Adhering to these procedures and maintaining transparent communication between employers and employees is crucial for ensuring fair compensation compliance with labour laws and promoting a positive work environment. In conclusion, fair compensation and proper procedures for overtime payment are vital for employee satisfaction, adherence to labour regulation and efficient work practices. Understanding the specific regulation in each country and fostering transparent communication between employers and employees contribute to a positive work environment and sustainable business operation. By following these principles, companies like Toyota Assembly Sdn Bhd can ensure fair treatment of employees and promote a healthy and productive workplace.